The auction room in Flaxborough was not generally a scene of high drama. Its usual excitements were the chance mislabeling of a silver-plated toast rack as Georgian or the feigned indignation of a dealer over a rival bid. But on this particular afternoon, with the townspeople crammed shoulder to shoulder amongst lots of walnut furniture and dust-laden curiosities, a spectacle occurred that no one in Flaxborough had yet dared to script: the collapse of Mrs. Ventnor's carefully advertised widow's auction into scandal and suspicion. It began just as the auctioneer's gavel fell on the first lot of the afternoon. A mahogany writing bureau said to have belonged to Mrs. Ventnor's late husband, known in his day for meticulous bookkeeping, if not much else. A commotion rose from the back. A man had made his way through the crowd, half whispering, half shouting, and carrying what appeared to be a folded parcel wrapped in brown paper. He laid it on the bureau, insisted it had come from one of its secret compartments, and proclaimed his discovery unsuitable for public sale. When at last the wrapping was removed, its contents shocked even the hardened curiosity dealers. Inside, amid old invoices and brittle papers, lay a letter suggesting Mr. Ventnor's death had been anything but natural. For a moment, the room froze. Mrs. Ventnor's veil trembled. The auctioneer protested, the bidders murmured, and the whisper travelled. "Poison," someone said. "A scandal hushed up," said another. The hammer dropped once more, but the crowd had ceased to care for the bureau. They cared for the story now, the nasty, half-true fragments of it, and Mrs. Ventnor, pale as the damask cloth she had laid out for refreshments, uttered a single instruction: clear the room. City, countryside, farmer and draper, reluctantly, noisily, they went, though voices lingered behind in the damp air. "She's put that in there herself," whispered the draper's wife, tugging on her husband's sleeve as if compelled to share forbidden proof. "Nonsense," said the church verger, already rehearsing what he would tell the rector. "It's planted by somebody hungry for her money." At the Bar of the Feathers, half an hour later, a regular announced with deep satisfaction that the late Ventnor was in deeper debts than anyone guessed, and this is just the smell rising from the grave. A council clerk, flushed from having been seen at the auction when he should have been working, quietly excused himself. "There'll be a proper inquiry. No need to speculate." By dusk, every lamp-lit street rang with contradictions. Each theory made less sense than the last, but in Flaxborough that rarely mattered. Among the few whose interest was observant rather than speculative was Inspector Purbright. He had attended with no more purpose than mild curiosity for Mrs. Ventnor's sale. He alone, amidst the scandal, leaned closer to the bureau, not for the letter, but for what surrounded it. While most stared at the words and gasped, his gaze lingered on the brass lock pattern. One half of it gleamed as though recently polished, the other was dulled with years of dust. He did not touch it, nor remark upon it. His eyes simply noted, and a faint crease formed upon his forehead, expression enough for those who knew him to suspect a small truth had already been pocketed. Sergeant Love, flustered by the gossip spilling from every side, finally approached his superior. "But, Inspector," he half whispered, half pleaded, "if the letter were hidden in there all this time, surely it proves what people are saying." "Doesn't it?" Love's honest face carried the same bewilderment as the crowded assembly hall. Purbright glanced at him, his voice as mild as if addressing a child who had asked whether the sun might rise tomorrow. "Proof is a curious thing, Love. It has the distressing habit of appearing genuine when it is, in fact, something quite else. One might, for example, discover a body in a coffin. The difficulty lies in whether it was meant to be there in the first place." Love blinked, not sure whether to laugh or to sharpen his pencil. The remark, typical of Purbright, drifted through the stale room and left the sense that what had been shown was not, after all, what it seemed. Before they departed, one last disturbance came to inflate the story. The auctioneer, rummaging nervously through the catalogue at his lectern, stammered that the bureau, The very piece in question had not in fact been listed for sale that day. According to the ledger, it had been withdrawn by Mrs. Ventnor a full week earlier. Yet there it stood, polished, catalogued in error, and presented for public purchase. This detail, more than the letter and more than Mrs. Ventnor's quivering poise, unsettled the watchers. For if the bureau had not meant to be auctioned, how had the letter found its way into it at exactly the moment of inspection? Purbright offered the barest tilt of his head, closed his notebook, and walked back into the cooling evening with the faint suggestion of a smile. Behind him, the hall roared again with voices. Some certain Mrs. Ventnor was guilty of her husband's death, others convinced the letter was scattered bait set by an enemy. For the inspector, it was no longer the letter itself that mattered, but the awkward contradiction of where that bureau was supposed to have been. "Inspector," said Love as they stepped into the street lamp's glow, "are you saying someone wanted all this discovered?" Purbright gave the question to the night air and let silence answer for him. And so the first theory bloomed, a dozen more soon to follow, and the night in Flaxborough ended not in quiet, but in restless whispers and restless minds. A mystery that had lain hidden or planted was now opened wide, and if there was one thing Purbright knew of human beings, it was that they rarely hide only one thing at a time. The following morning dawned with a kind of brittle brightness that seemed more suited to a postcard than to Flaxborough's usual climate. Church bells sounded with their habitual indifference, shopkeepers unbolted their doors on schedule, and milk floated smoothly in bottles left on doorsteps. Yet beneath that surface routine, something restless moved through the town. It traveled in murmurs at grocers' counters, in knowing winks across the post office, and in the sly delaying of change at the bakery till. Everyone, from the curate's wife to the man who delivered bales of straw, carried an opinion about the Ventnor matter, and most had revised it 3 times since hearing the first version. Inspector Purbright, for his part, had developed the style of a man who appeared not to listen while, in fact, recording every word. His morning was divided between quiet observation in his office and several cautious telephone calls. By mid-morning, Sergeant Love had returned from the station steps, where he had been deflecting questions from eager townsfolk with a variety of platitudes ranging from "the police are looking into it" to the rather limp "it's far too early to say." When at last Love sat across from Purbright, his expression was that of a man trying to glimpse daylight through fog. "They all think it was Mrs. Ventnor," he blurted. "I can't step outside without someone insisting she either poisoned her husband or forged the letter. People are saying she only auctioned the bureau to make the discovery look like a chance. Though why she would want to advertise her own guilt, I can't follow." Purbright allowed the words to arrive, unhurried, and eventually lowered his gaze onto the pages before him. They were neat copies of Mr. Ventnor's death certificate and the original coroner's report. Cause of death: congestive heart failure, aged 57, underlying arteriosclerosis. The phrasing was as bland and final as any bureaucratic pronouncement could be. Yet beside the typed lines, Purbright had penciled notes, brief, cryptic observations which he had not intended for Love's eyes. "Quite so," Purbright said mildly, "but gossip is less a compass than a weather vane. It points towards whichever noise is strongest at that moment. Let us see whether the wind holds." Love flushed slightly, determined to be useful. "Should we question her?" "Mrs. Ventnor, I mean. I could draw up the statement forms." "That will come, Love. For now I would prefer to begin not with people but with objects. They are less inclined to contradict themselves out of embarrassment." By early afternoon they were at the town auction rooms. The great oak doors were closed, but a caretaker admitted them, muttering about the commotion of the day before. The bureau stood against the wall where it had been hastily pushed aside, a patient, innocent item of furniture, as capable of lying as one might accuse a stone of exaggeration. Purbright knelt to examine the lock again, producing from his pocket a small notebook into which he entered meticulous yet spare phrases. He drew Love's attention to the distortion in the brass plate, noting how half had worn smoother than the rest. "Why would it polish unevenly?" Love asked, crouching down awkwardly. "If," Purbright replied, "a key that did not fully belong to it were repeatedly forced." He tapped the lock very gently with his knuckle. "One learns much, Love, by the struggles of a stubborn key." Love brightened. "So somebody's been tampering. Perhaps to put that letter inside, make it look as though—" "Perhaps. But let us notice also what we have not yet found." Purbright reached into the drawers, sliding them open and testing each one. They were empty save for the faintly sweet, stale odor of old paper and furniture polish. No other letters, not even the sort of dull receipts one generally finds left behind. Maybe she cleared them out before the sale. Maybe, but that does not explain why the bureau appeared in this room at all. The caretaker, growing impatient with their slow probing, interrupted. "Mrs. Ventnor told us last week it was withdrawn, said she couldn't part with it, held too many memories. Then yesterday, just before the viewing, it was suddenly back on the list. Mr. Cartwright, our auctioneer, swore it wasn't his doing. Catalogue sheets had been altered by someone's hand, not the typist's." Purbright looked up. "You have those sheets?" The man shuffled off, returning with a stack of dog-eared catalogues. Purbright leafed through quickly until his finger stopped on the relevant page. "Lot 47, Bureau Mahogany, circa 1880. Withdrawn, initials struck out in pencil. Yet in the master copy, retained for the auctioneer's own reference, the Bureau's entry stood unblemished, as if it had never been withdrawn at all." Love frowned. So either she changed her mind and asked them to put it back, or someone else required it to be there, firmly labeled in public, Purbright finished. He closed the sheet without haste, slipped it neatly back into its bundle, and rose with a sigh. Later that day, their visit shifted inevitably to the Ventnor residence itself, a detached late Victorian house that gazed down the street with a mixture of weary grandeur and peeling paint. Mrs. Ventnor received them in a drawing-room cluttered more with sentiment than taste. Porcelain dogs, framed samplers, dark drapes that trapped the afternoon light. She was a small woman with a voice held rather like a trembling saucer, brittle, impatient, partly frightened, yet unwilling to show more terror than was strictly conventional. "I will say this once," she declared before either man had positioned himself. "My husband died of his heart. That was 5 years ago. If some ghoul has decided to play tricks with letters, I resent being taken for their accomplice." Purbright did not contradict her. His gaze traversed the gloom and settled with faint appreciation upon a row of photograph albums. "Quite understandable, madam. I should like merely to know how that bureau yesterday came to be for sale." She stiffened. "I told Cartwright weeks ago it was to be removed from the list. I could not, will not sell it. The drawers are mine to keep, however empty." "Yet it was on display." "Then someone has ignored my instruction. What sort of auction house is he running?" Color touched her cheeks. "If you expect me to believe a forged suicide note, or whatever it is—" "Not suicidal, madam," Purbright said softly. "Rather the opposite. Accusatory. It hints your husband's passing had a more deliberate hand behind it." Love noticed her hands clenching the arm of her chair. "Nothing of the kind. He had attacks for years before the end. Any doctor will tell you. Did you know, Inspector, I nursed him through everyone, up night after night, terrified each wheeze would silence him. I loved him, though Lord knows he gave little reason." Purbright inclined his head. "And in all those nights, Mrs. Ventnor, you collected his papers, invoices, records?" "Of course, he painstakingly recorded every shilling. It was his pride." Her voice softened despite her irritation. "I burned most of it eventually. The clutter never ended. But not everything. Some papers went astray. Number burned or saved. Nothing went astray." Here, Purbright paused, letting silence grow large enough that she fidgeted. Then he rose quietly, thanked her with unhurried courtesy, and departed before she could frame more objections. Love followed, baffled. Once outside, the sergeant whispered urgently, "She's hiding something. You heard how nervous she got about the bureau. And what about her burning all the documents?" Purbright adjusted his hat. "I heard, love, more than she intended. She has not yet lied outright. Instead, she has been careful in what not to answer. That is often more interesting than a direct refusal. But why plant a letter that accuses her? That makes no sense." "Precisely." Purbright set off down the pavement. "When something makes no sense, it tends to mean our assumptions are misplaced. We will not waste ourselves in indignation at inconsistency. We will simply note it like a pin placed in a map and proceed." As evening drew in, Love could not help but replay the contradictions. The bureau was withdrawn, then reinstated. The polished lock consistent with tampering. Catalogue entries altered, and most unnerving, the discovery of a letter that seemed to hurt Mrs. Ventnor more than any amateur conspirator might expect. A town full of rumours treated each fragment as evidence, but under Purbright's cool procession of thoughts, every piece of gossip looked uncertain, wobbly, and untrustworthy. Back at the station, Purbright spread an open notebook where he wrote in clean lines across the page. Not suicide, not confession, performance. Love peered over his shoulder. Performance? "A letter may tell us something," Purbright murmured. "But where it is staged to be found, that tells us more." The clock sounded the half-hour, and silence fell between them. Outside, Flaxborough's windows closed one by one, townsfolk retreating behind curtains to replay again their own versions of Mrs. Ventnor's disgrace. None guessed how little pleasure the inspector took in their theories, and how steadily he now hunted after whoever had shaped the performance of that letter. For in Purbright's experience, no performance was crafted without an intended audience, and no audience chosen without design. And somewhere among Flaxborough's gossiping voices, the hand that prepared the act was waiting to see whether his audience applauded or fled. The morning after their visit to Mrs. Ventnor, Inspector Purbright sat at his desk with the calm persistence of a man waiting for a clock to reveal its next tick. Sergeant Love arrived full of clumsy energy, balancing a stack of papers and a cup of tea precariously in one hand. He placed both on the desk, spilling a little of the tea across the death certificate copy from the day before. "Sorry, sir, but I've been looking at the old coroner's record again, and something doesn't sit right. If it were heart failure, why would anyone bother with all this theatre? What's to gain by pretending he was poisoned after the fact?" Purbright closed the file with one hand, preserving it from the spillage. A pertinent question, Love, though when one is surrounded by actors, the play often conceals its motive until the last act. The coroner's record is useful, but recall, it does not exclude the possibility of a hand behind nature. Nor does it oblige us to conclude there was such a hand. That is the puzzle. Why trouble the town with an accusation so vague and so gratuitous? Love pulled a chair forward noisily. If somebody wanted to blacken Mrs. Ventnor's name, this is one way to do it. Folks have never much liked her, you know. I've heard my mum say she could sour milk with a look. Purbright smiled faintly, his thoughts elsewhere. The letter remained in his mind as a piece of calculated theatre. Its placement within the bureau was too convenient, the timing too neat. Yet to dismiss it entirely would be folly. He rose from his chair with sudden decision. "Love, fetch your coat. We will pay a visit to Mr. Gibbons." The mention of Gibbons brought no immediate recognition to Love until Purbright supplied, "He was Ventnor's clerk at the time of his death. I imagine he will remember more of his employer's habits than Mrs. Ventnor has elected to share." The office of Gibbons and Son, accountants, turned out to be lodged above a draper's shop near the market square. Within, papers climbed the walls in heaps that looked both fragile and immovable. They resembled ancient archives rather than working ledgers. Mr. Gibbons himself, a man with a shiny scalp and a nervous cough, received them with the alarm one usually reserved for tax inspectors. 5 years since poor Ventnor passed, he said hurriedly, and only last week I sorted through the last of his files. Of course, most were of no consequence. Bills, half-finished calculations, personal accounts he insisted upon keeping separate from mine. Purbright adopted a look of mild interest. Personal accounts, you say? Yes. Though quite beyond my sphere, you understand. He was obsessively private. Kept a second set of ledgers in his bureau. Your very bureau, I presume. This drew Love half out of his chair. Then the letter being in there, well, that proves something, doesn't it? Purbright's hand restrained him with a small gesture. And these personal ledgers, Mr. Gibbons, what became of them? The accountant faltered, tapping his glass with a pencil. He withdrew them a fortnight before his death. Brought them home, said he wanted to examine some inconsistencies himself. My assumption was that it was nothing out of the ordinary. But well, I never saw them again. Love scribbled notes with a furrowed brow. So they could have gone into the fire along with those receipts Mrs. Ventnor mentioned. Purbright's eyelids lowered slowly. Yes, Love, they might. After taking their leave, they strolled the market square. Purbright kept a leisurely pace, gazing not at the stalls or passers-by, but inwardly, as though his mind wandered through cupboards more inaccessible than Gibbons' dusty files. Love finally broke the silence. So the letter wasn't the only thing hidden in that bureau. If all his secret ledgers were there once, maybe we're missing, Purbright supplied gently. The word you are seeking is not missing, Love, but missing still, which is a rather different state of affairs. A missing thing may have wandered off by accident. A thing missing still suggests someone has taken very great care to ensure it remains so. Well then, who would want it hidden? The wife? One of his clients? That depends on what the ledgers revealed and whether the knowledge of them was shared. Secrets are seldom so sacred as to be held by only one person. Even if Mr. Ventnor kept his papers close, it is reasonable to imagine another pair of eyes glanced at them. That afternoon, in the quiet of the station, Purbright asked Love to retrieve any record of Mr. Ventnor's debtors and creditors in the year of his death. Love attacked the task with boyish zeal, rummaging through municipal files until, with some triumph, he handed over copies of banking references and unpaid notes. Purbright studied them, eyebrows lifting ever so slightly at one entry. A loan extended privately to a local council member, Mr. Peter Hargreaves, of no small standing in Flaxborough. A councilman borrowing from Ventnor privately, Love said, incredulous. Surely he had the bank for that. Had the bank not refused him, Purbright said evenly. He tapped the file. Here are his collateral notes. Rejected. Ventnor's private generosity seems to have stepped in, though one must assume for a healthy return. Men in council positions often dislike their accounts being discussed in public. Love scratched his head. You think Hargreaves planted the letter to keep attention off what he owes? Purbright replaced the file. I think, Love, that we should ask ourselves why the town should be confronted with whispers at precisely this moment. If the Bureau revealed something 5 years silent, what new element stirs it into speech now? Letters do not migrate of their own will. They are coaxed. By evening, another voice joined the chorus of rumor. At the Feathers, a tradesman declared he had once delivered parcels to Ventnor the very week before his death. Parcels wrapped in brown paper, strikingly similar to that which had contained the incriminating letter. Listeners seized upon this, insisting now that the paper itself was genuine proof of forgery, that Ventnor's own stationery had been stolen for the plot. Others swore the tradesman had remembered it wrong. The gossip gained a new stride, faster and more poisonous. Love carried the account back to Purbright, flushed with certainty. And you see, sir, the wrapper was his. That means whoever planted it had access to Ventnor's own things. Purbright, however, remained unmoved. "It means merely that the story of the rapper has been told. Whether the rapper itself confirms it is quite another matter." He folded his hands, staring at the closed files upon the desk. "You see, love, actors cannot resist adding color to the performance. Each embellishment tells us less about the moment the truth occurred and more about how the script is being improved in rehearsal. We will need, therefore, to observe very closely who profits by such improvements." The day concluded with an errand unexpectedly fruitful. A member of staff at the auction house sent word that, prior to the sale, a gentleman had been observed lingering near the bureau longer than any casual browsing required. The description was vague, but suggested someone of middle years with a pronounced limp in his right leg. When Purbright heard it, he gave the faintest nod, as though a cloud had thinned a fraction. "Love," he said, "do you recall Councilman Hargreaves' gait?" Love brightened, startled. "He does limp, yes. An old injury from the war." "An inconvenient clue," Purbright murmured, "in that it aligns itself too easily with our suspicions. Let us hold it carefully, in case its neatness turns out to be a snare." Love stared at him helplessly. "But if the councilman tampered with the bureau, well, that must mean he's guilty, surely." Purbright reached for his notebook, inscribing in it a single line without revealing it to Love. His calm voice filled the room. "It means, Sergeant, that the curtain has only lifted on our next act. Perhaps we should attend the council meeting tomorrow afternoon and enjoy what drama may unfold." For every piece placed upon the board increased the shape of doubt, and in Purbright's deliberate mind, the game was only beginning. The next afternoon arrived with a kind of heavy anticipation, as though the town itself prepared for a performance. The council chamber, a lofty Edwardian hall with faded portraits of aldermen glaring across its oak paneling, buzzed with more spectators than usual. Council meetings in Flaxborough rarely drew a crowd beyond the clerk's family and a sprinkling of reporters. Yet on this day, word of Inspector Purbright's expected attendance had stirred curiosity. The Ventnor scandal hovered in every whisper, and the name of Councilman Hargreaves floated thick as smoke. Purbright entered without ceremony, his composure unbroken by the attention drawn to him. At his side, Sergeant Love looked resolutely forward, face tightened into seriousness that failed rather badly under the weight of his nerves. They took their seats toward the back as the mayor called proceedings to order. Items relating to drainage, lamplight repairs, and the repainting of the public library were dispatched quickly, though the councillors' minds were plainly elsewhere. Only when Hargreaves rose to speak on a financial allocation did the atmosphere tighten. The man's limp, slight but noticeable, carried him to the center table where accounts were arranged. He was of solid build, with dark hair combed flat, and a mustache tended more carefully than his dwindling prospects suggested. His speech began ordinarily enough, but it faltered when a slip of paper fluttered from his own file onto the polished oak floor. Someone in the gallery noticed first, whispering audibly, and heads turned at once. Purbright's gaze tracked the paper until an usher retrieved it. It was not an official document, but a sheet bearing Ventnor's handwriting, an item that had no legitimate place among Hargreaves' council notes. The murmurs grew swift and heated. Hargreaves blanched, snatched the paper from the usher, and stuffed it into the pile before him with all the grace of a man concealing stolen goods. The mayor, puzzled, attempted to press on with business, but the crowd had tasted something more entertaining than budgetary matters. From the chamber doors to the far bench, rumors flared instantly. The councilman had debts. The councilman had tampered. The councilman, indeed, was the villain. Sergeant Love writhed in his seat with a mixture of eagerness and unease. "We've got him, sir, caught red-handed. Ventnor's own handwriting in his council papers. That clinches it." Purbright's brow barely moved. "We have caught something, Love. Whether it is him remains to be tested." He studied the room with the quiet patience of a man noting the sun's path during an eclipse. Hargreaves, sweating now, struggled through his statement while onlookers leaned forward to savor his discomfort. By the close, his notes were barely comprehensible, his arguments scattered. The mayor adjourned hurriedly, desperate to quell gossip, but the meeting had already achieved what gossip requires: spectacle. Outside the chamber, a knot of townsfolk formed, their voices sharpening. Some spoke jeeringly, pleased that a figure of authority might fall. Others shook their heads, muttering darkly about conspiracies within the council. Hargreaves himself darted through them with little dignity, face red with the exertion of escape. Purbright and Love followed more slowly, walking under the fading light. Love leaned close, unable to stem his excitement. "We saw it with our own eyes, Inspector. That must mean he planted the letter yesterday, too. Why else would he carry Ventnor's papers around in his file?" Purbright's eyes considered the cobblestones before them. Why indeed? Yet consider, Love, how remarkably theatrical this afternoon became. Hargreaves, with his limp already whispered about, now spills another prop from his file, a paper sure to inflame suspicion further. Did it feel to you like discovery, or like performance? The sergeant stopped in his tracks. But if it's performance, sir, then who's the actor for? Purbright gave the faintest shrug. For the same audience as before, the people of Flaxborough. Nothing sustains a fiction so well as fresh scandal delivered on cue. That evening found the inspector and his sergeant once more at their station office, the gaslight glimmering above as silence stretched. At length, Purbright unlocked the evidence cabinet and withdrew the letter discovered at the auction. He laid it on the desk beside the account of the day's chamber incident. His pencil traced the loops and slants of handwriting, pausing deliberately. Compare, Love, the style in the letter with the samples filed from Ventnor's estate. Do they strike you as identical? Love bent, squinting hard, and nodded. Looks the same to me. Strong, tidy loops, capital letters, straight as soldiers. Indeed, at first glance. And yet, notice the spacing. Here in his invoices, the figures are separated evenly, the pen lifted after each stroke. But here, within yesterday's letter, the strokes seem threaded together as though written with haste, or by imitation too intent on consistency. Love's enthusiasm cooled. So, maybe forged or traced. Perhaps not traced, too fluid, but imitative, as if performed for effect. Each line is steady, yet unnatural in its confidence. One could almost say it is handwriting concerned less with communication and more with being observed as convincing. Love exhaled disappointment. So if Hargreaves had that note, maybe he didn't write it at all. Maybe it was planted in his file, like in the bureau. Purbright allowed a smile to flicker. Exactly, Love. A play within a play. An accusation within an accusation. Each time the curtain rises, the actor changes, but the script remains constant. Ventnor, his papers, and suspicion distributed like programs among the crowd. The sergeant sat back heavily, processing. But if someone's staging all this, then the question is why bring it up now? Ventnor's been dead for years. Purbright leaned back, eyes narrowing. Because memory, Love, is a currency. And like any currency, it is spent only when profit demands it. Whoever resurrects Ventnor's name does so at a price they hope to collect. The following morning broke with the full force of communal outrage. Newspapers carried insinuations of corruption within the council, fed by eager reporters who had been in the chamber. Hargreaves protested loudly, insisting the mysterious paper had been planted. His denials only charged the gossip further. At bakeries, the talk was whether he would resign by the week's end. At the pub, men proposed sweeping purges of the council. Hargreaves's limp, once a minor curiosity, was now brandished as a symbol of his crookedness, as though physical defect testified to moral weakness. Meanwhile, Purbright, untouched by the fever, walked slowly through the marketplace, listening to the rhythm of speculation. He stopped only once to ask the newspaper boy who had delivered early papers to houses bordering Ventnor's old firm. The boy stammered that a stranger had asked directions near Gibbons's office 2 nights prior. A man with a cane, tall and dressed rather better than a tradesman. Purbright pocketed this quietly, storing detail against detail like pins in his board. By evening, just as the town seethed with conviction, word of another discovery reached the station. A packet had been left on the steps of the church vestry, discovered by the verger. Wrapped again in familiar brown paper, it contained another letter, this one suggesting that not only had Ventnor died improperly, but that the truth had been concealed by officials. It named no names, offered no specifics, but its arrival at the vestry ensured instant circulation among the devout. It spread from parish to pew like fire catching rafters. Love brought the letter in at once, indignant. "They're mocking us, sir." Another one, just when suspicion was cooling into certainty. "How many of these things can there be?" Purbright didn't answer immediately. He examined the letter, noting the same steady imitation of Ventnor's hand, the same fluid but calculated pressure. Then he looked at Love with gravity. "As many as the author requires, Love. Each one was distributed like a ticket to draw the town into deeper scandal. The stage grows more crowded because, you see, the audience has not yet clapped, and no actor stops till he hears the applause." Silence thickened, broken only by the scratching of Purbright's pen as he entered his thought into the notebook. Love leaned forward, eyes bright with uncertainty. "What's the next move then, Inspector? Stake out the church, search Hargreaves' office?" But Purbright's hand paused mid-notation. "The next move, Love, is to look not forward, but backwards. A play may dazzle with what happens next, but the truth prefers to slip quietly in what has already been overlooked." And with that, he snapped the notebook shut, knowing that the storm in Flaxborough was only beginning to gather its true force. The second letter left at the vestry spread like smoke through thatched chimneys, impossible to halt, tainting the very air of Flaxborough. By the following morning, tongues already blistered with speculation found fresh fuel. If the first letter suggested intrigue, and the appearance of Ventnor's paper in Hargreaves's file offered corroboration, the second letter now transformed gossip into near certainty. The cover-up, as the word rang down the high street, was no longer a whisper, but an article of faith. And faith in Flaxborough, once hardened, could not be undone by cautions. Inspector Purbright walked the narrow lanes between market stalls that morning with Sergeant Love at his side. Shop counters trembled as conversations snapped shut at his approach, only to resume the moment his back was turned. Purbright felt the stare of townspeople with the mild resignation of a man who knows his silence will irritate them more than any answer. Love, however, was less immune. "It's Hargreaves they all want, sir," he muttered as they passed the ironmonger's. "Near enough shouting his guilt from the rooftops. I don't think he could set foot in the Feathers today without being hounded." Purbright's reply was soft, almost kind. "A town is rarely more united than when it has selected itself a villain. It is a pleasant thing to feel so certain, all doubts swept into the pocket of another man's coat." "And you don't think it's him?" Love said, almost accusing. Purbright gave no direct answer. Instead, his brown eyes flicked from one shop window to another. "Tell me, Love, when the second letter appeared, why did it not accuse him by name? It had an opportunity, surely. The town was already primed to take it as gospel. What does that omission suggest?" Love thought furiously, but found no satisfactory theory. Maybe whoever left it wanted to leave things vague. Keep people talking. Yes, vague suspicion is far more durable than a sharp point, which breaks when it strikes the wrong surface. To sustain a performance, one extends the suspense. By midday, the police station doors swung open to admit a harried figure. Mr. Cartwright, the auctioneer himself, waistcoat strained, collar damp with effort as though he had run there. Clutching his hat, he demanded an audience with Purbright. They ushered him in, Love pressing him into a chair. It wasn't me. Whatever folk are saying, I swear on my license, those catalogue entries were tampered with. I did not alter them. I did not put the bureau on display, and yet I'm being pointed at. My reputation ruined. Purbright tilted his head gently. Who is pointing, Mr. Cartwright? All of them, the auctioneer cried. Since that council business yesterday, customers avoid my office. A woman at the grocery store hissed that I'd helped cover it all up. Love leaned eagerly forward. Did you notice anyone near your entries or files on the day of the sale? Cartwright dabbed his forehead and shook his head. The only one who lingered was Hargreaves. Limp and all, said he wanted to check particulars. He jotted something with his pen, then left. I thought nothing of it. Why would I suspect shorthand scribbles? And look how it seems now. Lord, people will think I'm his accomplice. Love seized on it. So there's our proof. Hargreaves interfered with the catalogue, planted the letter too. Everyone saw him with those papers. We've tracked this from start to finish. Proof, Sergeant, said Purbright gently, is a mosaic assembled from pieces that fit. What you present is a handful of shards, all apparently similar in color. Until they are placed beside the other fragments, we cannot know if they belong to the picture at all. But Cartwright's visit had done its work outside the walls. Rumor now roared that the auctioneer had collaborated with Hargreaves to cover up Ventnor's death. By sunset, crowds in the streets whispered about resignation, arrest, scandal that would drag down half the council. Even the verger, proud custodian of the vestry discovery, suggested to his choir that the inspector must now act, however unpleasant his duty. Love, flushed with the thrill of unanimity, tried again at the station that evening after scribbling notes into a pad filled with margins deep. Sir, really, surely it must be him. Why, even the caretaker swore a limping man lingered at the bureau. The slip of paper at the council chamber matched. The auctioneer saw him near the catalogue. It all adds up. He's guilty. Purbright set down his pen slowly, as though marking the end of a chapter only he could read. Does it? Or have you merely arranged it so? A picture may seem clear if one chooses to paint only with the colors that please him. Love bristled, but did not reply. Years beside the inspector had taught him that one did not force his conclusions like nails into wood. They had to emerge, quiet and inevitable, like rising steam from a kettle. 3 days later, Flaxborough received what it craved most, a scapegoat. Councilman Hargreaves, besieged by accusations and finding no ally brave enough to defend him, was discovered in his office at twilight, with his resignation penned and abandoned upon the desk. He had not yet submitted it officially, but had collapsed into despair. When the local reporter found him, grey-faced and trembling, the story spread faster than correction ever could. To the public, resignation constituted confession. That evening before the fire at the station, Love declared the case solved, his satisfaction palpable. Well, sir, that's an end. With his resignation written, he's as good as admitted it. There's no more play-acting left, I'd say. What scheme he thought would hide his debt? Well, it's caught up with him. Purbright, who had spent the better part of an hour gazing into the fire without apparent attention, said only, "What a pity, Love, that resignation, unlike guilt, may be compelled by circumstance rather than conscience. To make one villain may be convenient, but convenience is no substitute for truth." "What do you mean?" Purbright lowered his eyes to the flames. "That the true villain, my dear Love, is unlikely to descend into despair at mere suspicion. Whoever arranges so intricate a plot will not crumple before applause has thundered to its end. And Hargreaves, though uncomfortable before the crowd, is not the sort of man to compose new theatre. He has merely found himself drafted into somebody else's script." Love stared, bewildered. "So, Hargreaves is just the fall guy, a false suspect?" Purbright folded his hands. "Precisely. The play demands an act of sacrifice, and the audience has been satisfied. For a time. But the playwright, he watches still, waiting for the curtain to rise on his true design. And with that, in the still room crackling with firelight, Purbright closed the ledger of that day with deliberate calm, for he knew that the greatest lie entertained by Flaxborough was not the false guilt of Hargreaves, but the belief that the mystery had ended at all. Hargreaves's near confession, though incomplete and unsigned, was treated as final proof by most of Flaxborough. By the week's end, his name was spoken in taverns only as a synonym for shame. The townspeople, satisfied by his collapse, began to settle back into the daily hum of their routines, each secretly pleased at having forecast his downfall before it occurred. For a handful of days, prophecy seemed fulfilled, but Inspector Purbright never joined that sense of conclusion. While others dismissed the matter as finished, he kept returning quietly to the bureau, the catalogues, the letters. He allowed silence to ferment, noting what gossip now omitted. For when tongues fell quiet, he knew it was usually because they had been given a false resolution. He bided his time. The time arrived not in the bustle of daylight, but in the odd stillness of midnight. A storm had pressed itself against the town, heavy with rainless air, and Purbright had instructed Love to accompany him on a patrol past St. Mary's churchyard. The sergeant, yawning broadly, shifted in his greatcoat and asked if the night prowl related to the vestry discovery. "Letters find churches convenient," Purbright replied without looking at him, "not because of sanctity, but because of the curious foot traffic late at night. A vestry is less guarded than a vault, yet more respected than a tavern. It provides just enough secrecy for an actor to slip in his prop while trusting it will be found by a vigilant verger come morning." Love grumbled. "Then we should catch him in the act. If it's Hargreaves—" "Let us not spoil the suspense," Purbright murmured, "before we see how the script is staged." As midnight tolled, the iron gate of the churchyard whispered open. Both men, concealed by yew shadows, watched a lantern bob between gravestones. The figure moved stiffly yet deliberately, coat collar high, and in his hand he carried not a candle or prayer book, but a square box. He approached the base of a monument, Ventnor's grave itself, overgrown but unmistakable under damp stone, and placed the box carefully before it. Lifting its lid, he set within a folded paper weighed down with a stone. He bowed his head briefly, then turned and limped away. Love caught his breath. "It's him, Hargreaves. I knew it." His hand flew to his notebook, grasping for a pen. But Purbright, eyes narrowed, restrained him with a shake of the head. "Illumination deceives distance, Love. You saw a limp, certainly. But a limp is capable of deception." They crept forward after the figure departed. The box proved to be an old biscuit tin. Beneath the stone lay a letter, neat as before, its script unfaltering in false steadiness. Purbright read a line aloud under the wavering lantern light. "If justice lies silent, it is because its keepers gave it poison to drink." He replaced it and closed the lid. "Sir, surely we must arrest him now. We saw—" Love protested. "But we did not see," Purbright interjected softly. "We inferred." "A limp, yes, but not a face. Not even a frame clear enough for certainty. Why would our playwright repeat his props so nakedly? It is as if he wishes us to believe without question in Hargreaves' guilt. Suspicion has been served to us very hot indeed. One must always blow on hot soup before swallowing." By dawn, the churchyard discovery was known across town. Crowds visited the grave itself, treating the tin as a relic, proof of secret crimes long smothered. The verger carried tales of the midnight offering from door to door, embellishing with holy indignation. Pressmen sketched the monument where the paper had been found. Moralists at market stalls muttered that Flaxborough would prove itself infamous before long. And everywhere, Hargreaves' name returned with venom double its old heat. His limp, his debts, his collapse, every element stitched now into a single tapestry of guilt. Love felt almost bruised by the chorus pressing on him throughout the day. He looked to Purbright for confirmation, but the inspector remained, maddeningly calm. "Shouldn't we act, sir? People expect it. If you don't arrest him soon, they'll think the police are in on it too." Purbright smiled faintly, reflective rather than amused. "People expect many things, love. They also expect the sun tomorrow, yet it may rain. Shall we arrest the weatherman for his failure?" That afternoon, they called again upon Mrs. Ventnor. She met them in the same dim drawing room, her hands wrung into her lap, a weariness etched on her face. "How many times must I endure this? Letters at auctions, letters in churches, letters on my doorstep. I am sick half to death of it. They whisper that I killed him. My neighbors watch me like a snake." Purbright studied her quietly. "Perhaps that is precisely what the author intends, madam. To stir not justice but fear, a fog in which truth may hide." She turned on him bitterly. "And what do you intend, Inspector? To let them destroy me? Is that duty?" Purbright inclined his head gravely. "My duty is to the truth. Truth requires quiet, not clamor. Clamor is already being furnished amply by your neighbors. Until then, permit me a simple question. Who else knew the nature of your husband's private ledgers?" Her gaze darted to the hearth. "He spoke of them to no one except the accountant, Mr. Gibbons. To me they were numbers and nonsense. All I knew was his pride in them." Purbright offered thanks and withdrew, though Love sensed in the inspector's silence a weight pressing heavier. Along the cobbled lane he asked what it meant. Purbright only said, "Pride rarely tolerates secrecy without sharing it with someone. We must look again at who saw and who profited." The second set piece of the mystery unfolded that evening during a Vesper choir practice at St. Mary's. As voices strained imperfectly against the notes of a hymn, a crash resounded from near the vestry. The verger, pale and trembling, burst into the nave to announce that another letter had appeared, this one pinned directly to the inside of the hymn board itself, barely concealed under the number cards. The choir abandoned its harmony for outcry, and a dozen pairs of shoes scuffled to see the pinned sheet. Its words accused not merely nameless officials, but hinted strongly at police negligence. What greater corruption than those who call themselves guardians, yet bury questions 6 feet deep? The effect was explosive. By morning, theories inflamed not only the council, but also the inspector's own station. Jests, rumors, and questions rained upon constables in the streets. Some jokers even suggested Purbright himself had mislaid the letters and was covering his incompetence. It was precisely the kind of dramatic reversal Purbright had expected. The writer behind the plot, moving the spotlight from council halls to the police station, ensuring no institution could stand above suspicion. Love, harassed more than most, nearly threw his hands up when he joined the inspector in his office. "Now it's us, sir. People are pointing fingers at the very desk we sit at. Don't you see? Whoever it is won't stop until someone's ruined, and the town doesn't care who." Purbright's expression was calm, but his fingers drummed thoughtfully. "Yes, love, it is the cleverest stroke yet. When every potential keeper of truth is made suspect, the truth itself retreats further. Yet in the actor's zeal, he has revealed something vital." Love perked up anxiously. "Revealed? What do you mean?" "Notice, love. At the auction, the bureau, then the chamber, Hargreaves's file, the vestry, the tin before the grave, and last night the hymn board was in full view of the congregation. Each letter appears in a location staged for discovery, and each is carefully calculated to reach a larger audience than before. Our playwright grows ambitious. He cannot resist a larger theater, but ambition, love, is a lantern that can also light the way back to him." Love scratched his head. "So, you're saying he's setting traps for himself now?" A flicker of a smile moved Purbright's lips. "He cannot perform without stepping on his own stage. Every time we watch how a thing is revealed, we draw nearer to the hand that could not resist revealing it. And so, as Flaxborough swelled with outrage and certainty, Purbright sat quietly by his lamp, smoothing the edges of another letter with his fingertips, and murmured with quiet satisfaction, "The play reaches its turning point. We need only attend carefully to the actor's entrance." The hymn-board accusation unsettled Flaxborough more deeply than any prior incident, for the letters had now leapt beyond a private scandal or council intrigue into doubting the guardians themselves. When a town questions its constabulary, half its citizens take glee, the others fear for their safety, but all seem suddenly frantic for a conclusion. It was exactly the kind of wide theatre Purbright suspected the playwright desired. By the day following, the inspector noticed an alteration in the gossip. Where before the name Hargreaves had been spat bitterly, now people spoke of broader corruption. They whispered of secret police files, of officials all complicit, of Mrs. Ventnor protected rather than accused. The letters had fanned their fire cleverly outward, and suspicion now consumed everything there. Purbright stayed unhurried and listened. Love, however, fumed. "Sir, we'll be washed away if this keeps on. The town doesn't want justice anymore. It wants entertainment. They're acting like a crowd round a Punch and Judy show." To this, Purbright replied mildly that the crowd's appetites often revealed its manipulator. When a dog circles the same tree long enough, love, one deduces not that the dog is foolish, but that something inside knows how to encourage him. That evening, as rain at last broke the heavy air and fell neat and soaking upon the cobbles, a development came quite without warning. Mr. Gibbons, the nervous accountant, arrived at the station soaked to the bone, clutching under his damp coat a bundle wrapped tightly in oilcloth. His face looked grey, his collar askew, his fingers trembling as if he had run through a storm to get there. "I couldn't keep it any longer," he stuttered, setting the bundle on Purbright's desk. It's his, Ventnor's. I swear, I meant no wrong, Inspector. I only kept them safe. For fear the wrong people would—" His voice cracked into silence. Purbright undid the bundle carefully. Inside lay 3 ledgers, ink fading yet crisp, entries ruled by a hand, meticulous and regular. Love gasped, leaning closer. "His private books," Gibbons said hopelessly. "I tried to tell myself the fire had taken them, but I could never do as she asked. Mrs. Ventnor. She wanted them destroyed after he died. She begged it even, so I claimed they were gone and, God forgive me, kept them hidden. But now, after these letters, I can't endure the thought they'll think they vanished by my own plotting." Purbright's fingers leafed through the volumes deliberately, pausing at occasional entries. Debtors' names appeared. Local tradesmen, publicans, a magistrate, and several farmers. The figures were precise, the interest severe. Then, more startling, sums crossing into thousands, not only to Hargreaves, but to others of higher repute. Among them was the name Cartwright, the very auctioneer now sworn enemy of suspicion. Love nearly burst out. 2 of them, Cartwright and Hargreaves, are both in debt. That's it, sir. They must have worked together. Either could have hated Ventnor enough or feared exposure by his papers. Purbright gently closed the ledger. Fear of exposure, yes. But hatred? Perhaps. Still, love, do not mistake opportunity for proof. Yet this convinces me of one thing. Whoever revives Ventnor's ghost with so many well-timed letters must have known of these ledgers. The common soul of the town could not whisper these details unaided, which means our playwright is no crude mimic, but a reader, and not of gossip, but of Ventnor's own numbers. They pressed Gibbons with questions. He confessed with wringing hands that he alone had access, excepting the occasions when Ventnor himself pored over them at home in the bureau. "I swear," the man shuddered, "I told no one." "Not a soul, but I suppose someone could have stolen a glance that final week when he brought them home." Purbright leaned back in his chair, eyes languid but mind racing. "Someone did, Mr. Gibbons. The question is who? For now, keep quiet. If others do not yet know of your confession, we may still use their ignorance. When Gibbons departed into the drizzle, Love's excitement quivered barely under control. "This is it, sir. This must be what the notes are about. The debts, the cover-up, Cartwright or Hargreaves, both named in there. Which of them, though?" Purbright's response was oblique. "The ledgers tell us who had motive. The letters tell us who has mischief. We must not confuse the two." But the revelation of the ledgers soon leaked, as leaks in Flaxborough always did. Within a day, a porter swore to have seen Gibbons at the station door with his bundle. A housemaid overheard him confiding in tears. By nightfall, the news was everywhere. Ventnor's secret ledgers had survived the fire, and they named respectable men as debtors. Gossip abandoned Mrs. Ventnor and Hargreaves temporarily and fastened itself to Cartwright instead. The poor auctioneer, already fragile beneath suspicion, now became the subject of outrage. Crowds formed impatiently outside his office the following morning. He tried to address them, stammering excuses, but his words drowned in jeers. "Rotten fruit sailed. Debt to a dead man," they shouted, "and lies about it." When finally Cartwright withdrew inside and bolted his door, the mob dispersed only after promising to repeat its visit. By dusk, rumors ran that he would flee town before long. Love, reporting all this with flushed cheeks, insisted it must be him. "The town thinks so as well. He's the one who put that bureau out after it was withdrawn. He owed Ventnor money and had cause to get rid of the evidence. Now he's exposed again. Clearly he's behind the letters too, trying to throw blame elsewhere." "Intriguing," Purbright observed mildly. "For if he is behind the letters, why choose to place one accusing the auction house itself? It would be rather like a man choosing to throw stones at the roof he sleeps under. A curious form of camouflage, if so. But doesn't it all line up? He had access, he had debts, he tampered with the bureau catalogue." "Perhaps so," Purbright replied, his calmness as infuriating as ever, and yet perhaps a little too neatly. When every clue falls into place without resistance, one suspects the picture has been drawn deliberately for us. "Tell me, love, do performers not rehearse their props carefully before the play?" "I believe our playwright rehearses likewise. He doubles his cast, first Hargreaves, then Cartwright, so the audience may rejoice in blaming one hero, then another. For what is a better guarantee of applause than giving the people more villains than they can boo?" That night, while Love wrestled with frustration, Purbright studied the ledgers again by lamplight. He noted with especial interest a string of minor loans, unremarkable for size but consistent in repetition. Loans taken by none other than the verger of St. Mary's. Small, steady sums, enough to burden, but not ruin. The names circled together in Purbright's mind. Hargreaves, Cartwright, the verger. All men whose dignity would falter if Ventnor's records came to daylight. Each is now ferociously implicated by gossip, though in turn. When Love returned to his office near midnight, he found Purbright gazing at the lamplight through a smear of his spectacles. He had written only 3 words in his notebook. "Same script, new actor." And the inspector, in his softest voice, said, "The real playwright remains hidden, Sergeant, but his theatre expands. Every villain the crowd seizes is another mask he discards. He is bold because he believes we will never look past the mask. Let us be very sure, love, that we do." Outside, Flaxborough shivered in rain, the mob dissipating for now, but breathless for the next revelation on the stage. The discovery of Ventnor's ledgers had cracked Flaxborough's open like a walnut, spilling out secrets that its respectable citizens had long pressed under polished surfaces. The atmosphere in the town was no longer just scandalous, it was febrile. People hurried across the market square, whispering, nodding in shadowed alleys, glancing over shoulders as though debts written by a dead man might yet be collected by mysterious hands. Each name connected to those ledgers was pulled into the gossip's tide, and in that gloom, Inspector Purbright saw more than opportunity. He saw human masks slipping. With Councilman Hargreaves fallen and Cartwright the auctioneer now vilified, the townspeople sought their next morsel. Whispers had already reached the station that the verger, who owed a place of respect within the church, might yet be among Ventnor's debtors. That detail had not, so far as Purbright knew, officially escaped the pages of the ledger, but secrets have wings in Flaxborough. Even as he wondered who had nursed the telltale morsel to freedom, he recognized the hand of the same playwright. "Notice the pattern, love," he mused, as they strolled the square on a wet afternoon, rainwater glancing down the gutters. Debts that should have remained safely embalmed in ink are ripening conveniently, one by one. Each debt is like a candle lit, illuminating the next character on the stage. First Hargreaves, then Cartwright, now the verger. And yet if one lights all the candles too quickly, the play ends before its climax. Our playwright is careful, but his eagerness betrays him. Love marched at his side with loyal exasperation. But who benefits by exposing them? That's what I can't see. The whole town's in chaos, but what use is chaos to anyone? To those who feel powerless, chaos is a sort of power, Purbright replied gently. And to those who nurse secret grievances, chaos is often the only revenge left. The verger, Mr. Bloomfield by name, hardly presented the form of a villain. He was a man whose entire face resembled that of a reproving owl. Round eyes, habitual frown, and a tendency to puff up indignantly when confronted with worldly trivialities such as the lateness of choir boys or the misuse of hymnals. Yet when Purbright called at the vestry door, Bloomfield melted at once into a fretful shadow of his usual self. "They keep hissing. At me, Inspector," he burst out before even greeting him. "Half the congregation believes I plotted with Ventnor, though heaven knows the man lent me no kindness. I borrowed what little I had no choice over, a cracked roof in my house, a sick aunt, you understand. But to be painted as some scoundrel, it is intolerable." Purbright moved with the politeness of a country doctor, nodding gently without judging. "You borrowed from him often, Mr. Bloomfield. Why always from Ventnor and not the bank?" The verger wrung his hands. "Because the bank has forms and requirements and a long memory. Ventnor had only his book and his price. Yes, the interest was extortion, but it was easy. He never asked questions. A man can endure debt better when shame is left unspoken. Banks ask questions, but Ventnor wanted none." Love scribbled notes clumsily, eyeing the verger with suspicion. "And yet, funny how the debts return now, in letters mimicking his hand." Bloomfield's eyes widened with fright. "You cannot think me guilty of that. Why, I can scarcely write a sermon notice without blotting it. No, I accepted my punishment enough each time I paid his interest. Yet who would carry his ghost back here to ruin me?" "Someone with more knowledge of your purse than the congregation ought," Purbright replied. "Did you ever speak of these matters to anyone else? Confide, even indirectly?" The verger hesitated, lips moistening nervously. Perhaps to Mrs. Ventnor, after his death. She asked me whether I still owed. I admitted small amounts. She seemed merely curious, not vindictive. Said she wished to remember her husband kindly and knew his debts might cloud that memory. I thought little of it. When they left him, Love was near to bursting. That's as good as a confession from her. If she knew his clients, she could be writing the notes herself, stirring things up so everyone feels ashamed. Maybe she resents them all. Purbright gave a mild smile. Yet consider her position, Love. Would she not have gained more by silence? What dignity accrues from advertising one's late husband as a usurer? And what safety lies in aligning all of Flaxborough against oneself? If she is indeed behind the letters, then she is remarkably self-sacrificial. Too remarkably, perhaps. Love groaned. Then who? Who else could know all these details? The inspector's gaze grew distant. Someone who read the ledgers, love. Someone who had occasion not merely to borrow but to examine. Remember Gibbons, the clerk, who admitted hiding them. Might another hand, before that, have also lingered over their arithmetic? While Love struggled with possibilities, Purbright walked him slowly past the shops, deliberately listening. At the butcher's they heard that Cartwright had locked his office, refusing business. At the grocer's, voices muttered that the verger's hand looked unsteady at service, proof of guilt. And, at the Feathers Inn, laughter, half drunk, jeered that Mrs. Ventnor had orchestrated the whole plot with her actress's veil. Each echo confirmed to Purbright what he had long known, that the author of these schemes did not need to convince with evidence alone. The theatre of suggestion was more powerful than stone facts. That evening, back at the station, Purbright unfolded the ledgers again, tracing the names without comment until he reached one that had not yet surfaced in gossip. It was smaller than the others, just a few pounds owed. But the name leapt at him because it belonged to a family well regarded, utterly removed from suspicion, Miss Isabel Sharp, the librarian. Love blinked when Purbright set his finger upon it. Well, sir, she's hardly the type. She lives among dusty catalogues and frowns when children raise their voices. You can't think. I think only that she borrowed, Purbright said quietly. And that she, unlike Cartwright or Bloomfield, spends most hours in the presence of pens, words, and handwriting. If one wished to practice imitation without attracting notice, Love finally saw it. A library. Blank sheets, careful lettering, and even old samples to copy. But why would she bother with the whole town scandal? That, love, is precisely the question. Purbright allowed himself a pause. Men borrow when they are hungry. Women too, though their hungers are sometimes less easily tallied. We must study what kind of hunger moved her. The following afternoon, beneath drizzle, Purbright visited the library. Miss Sharp greeted him stiffly, her spectacles catching the light. Around them, the musty perfume of old bindings filled the air. She inquired blandly after his interests, and he replied with equal blandness that he wished to consult parish records and council minutes. She supplied them briskly, lips pursed, and returned to her desk, where her fountain pen travelled with crisp elegance across a form. Purbright studied the penmanship. Indeed, the loops and flourishes of her hand carried the confidence he had marked in the anonymous letters. Calm, deliberate, more perfect than natural writing usually dared to be. He thanked her with politeness, borrowed his documents, and left with a glimmer faint as candle wax behind his eyes. That night, Sergeant Love found him again at his desk, weighing the suspicious symmetry of it all. Love pressed anxiously. So she's our suspect? The librarian? But Purbright only folded his notes away with the gentlest sigh. Not yet, love. She's a person of interest. The stage is gathering its characters, but we must wait until the playwright himself cannot resist stepping into the footlights. Only then will the applause expose him. Outside, Flaxborough hummed and hissed in darkness, but the inspector knew the play was nearing its richest act, and that the performer behind the curtain was closer than anyone guessed. The whisper of Missy Sharp's name lay unspoken on Purbright's tongue, though Sergeant Love continued to treat it as a half-caught thread. Yet the inspector, wary of snaring himself too early in a net, allowed no haste. He had learned long since that in Flaxborough, mysteries the guilty seldom burst through the curtain announcing themselves. They preferred to let another act or two unfold. And so, while Love pressed for pursuit, Purbright quietly watched the rhythm of the town. For several days, Flaxborough simmered. The ledgers gnawed at reputations. Cartwright had taken to hiding in his shuttered auction rooms. Hargreaves stayed home entirely, pretending an illness. Bloomfield plodded in and out of the vestry, with eyes drooping like a whipped spaniel. Each man was already ruined in the theatre of public opinion, each casting suspicious glances at the other. Purbright allowed the storm to rage, certain its energy would push someone sooner or later into an error. The error came in the form of a funeral. Mrs. Ventnor, perhaps weary of her ghostly persecution, had organized a memorial service for her husband, hoping that the presence of clergy and congregation would grant dignity to his name. It was not an anniversary, nor any special date, merely her attempt to overwrite the scandal with solemnity. Flaxborough, however, arrived not in reverence but in anticipation of spectacle. The church was crowded far beyond what old Mr. Ventnor had ever commanded in living days. Skeptics and busybodies alike packed into the pews, their hymnals clutched, eyes roaming like theatre-goers before a playbill. Purbright and Love attended, quietly stationed near the rear. The air was heavy with incense and disorderly excitement, every cough loud, every shuffle amplified by tension. The verger's hands shook as he lit candles, his reputation already shredded. Mrs. Ventnor sat stiffly at the front, dressed in unrelenting black. Above all, the hymn-board displayed its numbered cards as if daring fate to append further scandal. The rector rose, voice soft, and began the sermon. For a few minutes, solemnity did seem possible, until Love leaned forward suddenly, nudging Purbright. The inspector followed his gaze. A folded paper had appeared on the hymn-board during the sermon, pinned in plain sight as if by invisible hand. Gasps moved through the congregation, first in ripples, then waves. The rector faltered mid-sentence as murmurs overtook him. Boys stood on benches to squint at the words visible even from the back. "Ask the widow what she burns at night." The church erupted. Parishioners stood, whispering, pointing at Mrs. Ventnor. Red mottled her pale face as she rose abruptly, clutching her veil, and stormed down the aisle past the gawking assembly. The rector tried feebly to restore calm, but the crowd had obtained what it craved. Another act, more scandal, better than prayer. They poured out after her like crows in pursuit, buzzing apologies into accusations. Love, flushed with indignation and a dreadful sort of excitement, whispered hoarsely, "There it is again. Only she could have written this one. Who else would know she was burning papers? She admitted it herself, sir, all those documents of his, and now the town thinks she's still destroying them." Purbright moved slowly, deliberately, remaining as the crowd swelled outside. "Observe the effect, Love." The letters began with suspicion of a hidden death, continued with suspicion of officials, and spread to debts among respectable men. Now the knife cuts back upon the widow herself. It is not a straight path toward truth, but a circle, so the blame may whirl without ever grounding. That, Love, is most revealing. Police were forced to escort Mrs. Ventnor through the mob that had gathered outside the churchyard. Behind jeers, demands, and mutters, Purbright noticed a single figure calmly withdrawing. Miss Sharp, the librarian, her coat buttoned high, her face alert. She did not join the crowd's squabbling chase. Instead, she walked quickly but without hurry toward the direction of the library. Few paid her attention. Purbright's eyes lingered, but he said nothing till later. Back at the station, Mrs. Ventnor refused to speak beyond furious denial. "Yes, I burned his useless receipts, but never have I touched a pen to smear myself so. Do you think I would accuse myself publicly?" She clutched her veil like armor and demanded protection. Love, making notes in undue haste, insisted her outburst alone was proof. But Purbright merely thanked her, promised discretion, and allowed her the dignity of departure under guard. Love turned on him, almost betrayed. "Sir, it's her. It must be her. No one else's name carries through all the letters. The town knows it now. The funeral proved it." "The town," Purbright replied gently, "knows only what it is told to know. A crowd believes most firmly not when the truth is plain, but when the lie is entertaining." That evening, Purbright drew out the hymn-board letter and compared it against the previous. The flourish, the careful confidence remained identical. Yet the paper stock had altered. Thinner, marginally creased as though torn from a ledger or notebook. He turned it under the lamplight, breathed softly, and slid it into an envelope. Then he spoke almost to himself. "At last, love, our playwright has shown too little restraint. This sheet, this is not auction catalogue paper nor parish note paper. This is library stock, ruled faintly for cataloguing. See these shallow lines across it? Very few examine them, but I confess librarians do." Love gaped at the sheet. The librarian, Miss Sharp. But why would she write of the widow? She owes Ventnor herself. Wouldn't exposing all this draw attention back to her debt? Purbright's calm eyes did not leave the page. There are debts, love. One pays with money, and there are others one pays with humiliation. For a woman with grievances long buried, which coin gleams richer? Reputation, stained forever, may be a currency more satisfying to spend than pounds. Even so, he withheld final judgment. Instead, he remarked, "Every performance must climb towards climax." She cannot stop now, not when the crowd is primed for revelation upon revelation. There will be another letter soon, and that, love, will tell us not only the words penned, but the manner of its staging. She grows reckless in her triumph, and the reckless author always inscribes her own exit. The next day dawned gray, the town still swollen with excitement from the funeral disaster. Conversations began not with "good morning," but "did you hear what the board said?" Children repeated the phrase in mock tones on the roadside. Mrs. Ventnor stayed shut indoors. Cartwright locked himself tighter. The verger barely left his vestry. Yet in the library reading room, Miss Sharp moved serenely between shelves, her handwriting crisp in the registers, methodically lending books as if untouched by turmoil. But Purbright had marked her pen strokes now, and he waited, patient as the stage manager who knows the final act is at hand. The scandal of the funeral, with its cruel showcase message accusing Mrs. Ventnor, had not cooled even as rain scoured Flaxborough's cobbles the next morning. In fact, it seemed to purify the town's appetite rather than wash it away. Shops opened late, for every trader was busy first debating the meaning of the words pinned above the altar. Parish ladies rehearsed the line, "Ask the widow what she burns at night," with varied degrees of relish and pity. Each retelling made the scene sharper, as though repeated memory had carved it into fact. For the playwright behind the drama, the audience swelled. For Inspector Purbright, the trap tightened. While love urged him to arrest Mrs. Ventnor outright, "Before the whole town turns into a mob, sir," Purbright remained oppressively calm. A mob must be permitted its spectacle, love. Interrupt it too soon, and their anger shifts toward the interrupter. Let us observe. Crowds tire more quickly than they believe. But far from tiring, the crowd grew hungrier. That Thursday evening came the council's scheduled emergency meeting, called to address the spreading convulsions of scandal. Purbright, already suspecting fresh drama, insisted on attending. Love accompanied him reluctantly, murmuring that he hated the mixture of official procedure and popular curiosity that choked those chambers. The oak-paneled hall throbbed with voices the moment they stepped inside. Councilmen fidgeted, heads bowed in private defenses. Reporters scribbled eagerly, smelling collapse. The mayor called the proceedings to order, but order was never to be. The agenda, meant to brush practical matters, burst apart as voices rose, each attempting to shield himself from implication. It began with Hargreaves' injured pride now smoked into anger. Anger. He stood, trembling with both limp and fury, to protest he was innocent, a victim of calumny spread by an unnamed enemy. Letters in my own files. Can you not see the trick? They were planted by a devil with more knowledge than any of us, and I have been flayed in public for it. Before the mayor could respond, Cartwright, the auctioneer, shot up, trembling visibly. If you speak of devils, sir, consider what has been hurled at me. They say I filed that bureau after it was removed, but I did not. I swear it. Who benefits but another debtor, some pious church rat with his candles, or else the widow herself? His finger jabbed down the table. The verger, puffing like an owl cornered, leapt to his feet, eyes bulging. Me? Who found the letters, if not I? Must I discover my own ruin? Ridiculous. His indignation only fanned laughter from the spectators at the back. The chamber collapsed into confusion. Men shouted curses across benches, and others pounded fists. The mayor screamed for silence and obtained none. Each councillor, fearing exposure by one of Ventnor's books, now suspected the others. Orlando Bloomfield, the verger, accused Cartwright of deliberate misdirection. Cartwright cried that the verger had confessed to debt years before. Hargreaves insisted both of them had invented the whole business to cover their failings. Throughout it all, Purbright sat unmoved, hands folded, gaze steady. Love, beside him, shifted furiously. "This is worse than a tavern fight," he muttered. "It's bedlam." "It is theatre, love," Purbright replied with quiet delight. "Every man forced into character by fear. They speak lines they do not plan. Their desperation writes them. But notice what remains absent. Not one mentions who actually penned the letters. They fight over debts, not handwriting. Why such reluctance?" But the storm had not yet reached its climax. For amid the roaring din, a messenger burst through the chamber door carrying a folded sheet. He whispered urgently to the mayor. Faces turned immediately to the paper, now trembling in the mayor's hand. The room fell eerily silent as he read the first line aloud. It was another letter, another in Ventnor's hand, it seemed, and this one claimed to reveal the councilman who profited most from silence. The name was there, inscribed in bold script, Peter Hargreaves. Shouts erupted. Councilmen half rose, some swearing, reporters surged forward, pencils racing. Hargreaves staggered visibly, then collapsed back against the bench, his face ashen. From every direction came cries of "Resign now" and "Murderer." His limp, his debt, his humiliation, all now braided into a garland of shame. Love surged to his feet. "We can't ignore this, sir. They'll tear him apart." But Purbright's hand rested on his sleeve, insistently calm. "Watch." The crowd demanded Hargreaves' removal. The mayor, pale, called adjournment, but was almost drowned by the mess of yells. Hargreaves was swept out through the rear in a convoy of constables, jeered and spat upon by the mob outside. In the quiet that followed, Love turned to his inspector. "Well, that must settle it. He's guilty after all. The letter named him outright this time." Purbright replaced his spectacles, his mild gaze catching the lamplight. "Remarkable consistency of handwriting, would you not say, Love? As fluid as ever, as calm as though Ventnor had taken dictation from an angel. No real hand keeps such poise through so many sheets. But let me ask, why now must the writer name Hargreaves so boldly after so long teasing us with vagueness?" Love stammered. "Because he's guilty." "No," said Purbright softly. "Because the appetite of the town was beginning to pale with doubt, and our playwright feared losing his audience. So he threw them the most obvious villain once more. But in doing so, he has broken his method. Remember, the drama has always circled accusation, never landed. Now it lands. That eagerness betrays a tiring author." Love scratched his head, unconvinced, but Purbright's eyes, usually serene, gleamed with rare intensity. He turned toward the back of the chamber where the messenger had entered. Purbright had noticed the limp not of Hargreaves, but of the boy himself, exaggerated, theatrical, as though meant to mimic. He had noticed, too, a small blot of blue ink still shining wet on the boy's cuff. A library boy, certainly, sent hastily to deliver pre-written theatre at the perfect cue. When they left the hall, spectators still surging about them, Purbright paused on the steps and looked across the street. At the far corner, half hidden under a dripping lamp-post, Miss Sharp stood watching, her spectacles catching the glow. She did not join the jeering crowd, nor did she flee. She observed, and Purbright, who had marked the calm performance of her own pen at the library desk, felt confirmation settle in his mind. The librarian was orchestrating not just letters, but scenes, and tonight's chamber furore was her boldest stage set yet. Still, he said nothing aloud. He only noted under his breath to Love, "The curtain is nearly at its fall." And Flaxborough, raging its way through another night, could not guess that the playwright of its scandal was already rehearsing her final act. The night after the uproar in the council chamber, Flaxborough was a town gasping for its next scandal as though dependent on it for breath. Mrs. Ventnor secluded herself again, shutters drawn. Hargreaves all but disappeared into his house, guarded against stones and jeers. Cartwright took to sending worried notes to the police asking for protection. The verger muttered prayers with a kind of desperation, half pious, half selfish. There was only one citizen moving calmly through the storm, Miss Isabel Sharp, the librarian, who walked each day unwavering at the same pace, exchanged only curt replies and returned to her desk where her hand glided ceaselessly across registers. Inspector Purbright, however, detected cracks in her composure. He had studied enough actors to know that relish breeds risk. The letters had become bolder, the settings more public, the accusations sharper. His instincts told him the next revelation would be staged not in whispers, but in a blaze. And the louder a playwright plays, the quicker the echoes reveal the voice behind the curtain. Love, still rattled by the chamber riot, pressed relentlessly for arrest. "If we wait, sir, she'll ruin herself and everyone else with her next trick. You saw her in the hall, watching like a hawk. You saw the librarian stock up on that paper. There's no doubt." Purbright's answer was even, perhaps too calm. "Doubt, love, is exactly what we must cultivate, else we fall into her design. She thrives on the town's eagerness for certainty. We must be the audience that suspends judgment until the curtain finally falls." Events forced that curtain sooner than expected. The following Sunday, Flaxborough gathered once more in an outsized congregation, not for service, but for gossip. It was market day, and stalls lined the square. Baskets of apples, bolts of cloth, loaves of bread, all became convenient stages for the latest rumor. Then, at mid-afternoon, a shout rose from near the fountain. A boy waved another letter, found under the stone lip of the trough. Love groaned the moment it was spread open. Neat script, Ventnor's hand once more. But this letter exceeded all previous in its boldness. It accused by name not only Hargreaves, but also Cartwright, Bloomfield, and one unnamed official guardian of justice, hinting at the police themselves. It ended with a chilling directive. If the truth will not be dug by men, then dig the grave again, and within it you'll find what was buried. The crowd shrieked as one might at fireworks. Cries of reopening Ventnor's grave surged through the square. Some claimed it contained arsenic bottles, others the missing ledgers. A few swore they heard rumors of second remains. By dusk, an unruly procession marched toward the churchyard, intent on digging. Purbright and Love, summoned hastily by constables, arrived to find dozens gathered about Ventnor's monument, spades already hacking at soil. It looked for all the world like a mob trying to exhume truth with bare hands. Purbright raised his voice, calmly but loud enough to cut the din. "Ladies and gentlemen, disturbance of a grave is an offense that will not improve your knowledge, only lessen your dignity. If there is evidence within, the law will find it, but if you desecrate it only to satisfy your craving for amusement, you will spend your nights not in church but in cells." The force of his serenity stilled them. A few muttered, some jeered, but gradually, hands lowered spades. Purbright instructed constables to dismiss the crowd and sent them off sullenly. Yet he noticed, among the dispersing faces, Miss Sharp again, Her lips curved ever so slightly, standing just beyond lamplight. She too turned away, slipping back toward the library's direction. "Now or never," Purbright said softly. That evening, he took Love into the library itself. Miss Sharp was still there at her desk, a lamp beside her, writing carefully in her ledger of loans. Purbright announced himself gently. "Good evening, Miss Sharp. You work late as ever." She looked up, composed, spectacles glittering. The Service of Knowledge Inspector knows no hour. Purbright stepped nearer, watching the smooth strokes of her pen. "As does the art of performance, Miss Sharp. May we trouble you for a few moments of conversation?" Her mouth tightened. "Is this official business?" "It is the conclusion of one," Purbright said softly. He produced from his coat the last graveyard letter, unfolded it, and placed it before her. "The lines here match precisely the ruled stock used for cataloguing in this library. That is seldom found outside bookshelves. Your own ink, the same shade, blue-black, which stains your cuff tonight. More than coincidence." For the first time, color flushed her cheeks. "Circumstantial. Any pen could leave that mark." "Then there is the matter of delivery. A messenger limped conveniently into the council hall, bearing accusations against Hargreaves. That limp was performed too neatly, and he carried fresh ink upon his sleeve when he entered. When I asked whence his errand was, he said the librarian entrusted him. You, Miss Sharp?" She drew breath sharply, eyes narrowing. Love leaned forward, stammering. "Then it was you writing the letters, all of them. You forged Ventnor's hand." Her voice, when it came, was steady though trembling beneath. "Yes. Why not? No one remembers Whitfield Ventnor as I did. An extortioner cloaked in respectability. He bled this town and laughed. Every man was afraid of him, and every woman whispered about him. And when his heart finally failed, you policemen called it natural. Natural. 5 years of terror made light, dismissed with one folded certificate. No, Inspector, if you will not give us justice, then at least I gave these people the truth of a kind." Purbright asked gently, "Truth, Miss Sharp, or theatre?" Her chin rose defiantly. "What is truth but the story most believed, and haven't they believed? Look at them, tormented, yes, but alive. They will speak of Ventnor for decades now. His real crime was never written in court, but I have written it here, on every wall in town." Love gasped. "But to ruin good people, Cartwright, Bloomfield, Hargreaves." "Good," she spat softly. "Debtors groveling, terrified of exposure, yet happy to borrow from him, happy to look away. And Mrs. Ventnor," she stood by his side, "polished his accounts, lit fires to burn his sins. Do not tell me innocence was theirs." The inspector's mild eyes held hers for a long moment. Then he said, "Yet you borrowed too, did you not?" "A modest sum, but entered faithfully in his ledger. Perhaps that was your grievance, your own shame reflected in his perfect hand." Her composure cracked. She clutched the desk. "Yes, I borrowed, and I repaid twice over in the whispers of this town. He took money, I took memory. We are even." Silence filled the library, broken only by the scratching of the clock. At last, Purbright stepped back. "Miss Sharp, you will accompany us. The stage is ended. The curtain falls. The applause may echo still in the square, but the theatre is empty." The arrest was quiet, almost tender. She offered no struggle, only straightened her papers before surrendering, as though her library demanded order even in disgrace. Later, when Love asked why he had waited so long while the town boiled, Purbright answered simply, "Because to catch a playwright, one must let her finish her play. Were we to seize her too early, the audience would demand an encore and doubt. But now she herself confessed, not in words, but in pride. The theatre collapses only when the actor bows." And so Miss Isabel Sharp, librarian of Flaxborough, playwright of scandal, was led away. The town that had gasped and jeered and delighted in every revelation now faced quiet again, though its gossip would ripple for years. Mrs. Ventnor withdrew deeper into her shutters. Cartwright reopened his auction room cautiously. Hargreaves nursed his wounds of reputation, and Bloomfield puffed through sermons with the timid pride of survival. But it was Purbright who recognized the greater pattern, not merely of one woman's vengeance, but of a community enraptured by its own theatre, more eager for story than for truth. As they walked back from the library together, Love ventured one final question. "Sir, did you know it was her from the start?" Purbright's answer came mild, as always. "From the start, Love. I knew only that someone wished to tell a story. The trick was discovering who most relished the applause." And with that, he smiled faintly, as if some private satisfaction had been reached. Flaxborough, exhausted, returned to its restless peace. The play had ended, but Purbright knew another would always wait in the wings.